Let us break bread together on our knees. Let us break bread together.
Today on Cafe Catechesis, I'm going to show you just how biblical the office of the papacy is. Up to this point in the Gospels, Jesus hasn't mentioned anything about any keys to the kingdom or binding and loosing. What he says seems strange since there's no New Testament precedent for it. The first rule of New Testament interpretation is that when you come across something you don't understand, look to see if you can find some sort of Old Testament correspondence for it. This particular cluster of imagery, keys, kingdom, binding, and loosing, only appear in one place in the Old Testament, Isaiah 22:22. In fact, this passage from Isaiah is a gold mine of correspondence with Matthew 16. It should be no surprise that the primary background Jesus is drawing from when he makes this mysterious statement to Peter is the prophet Isaiah, a book of no little importance to Jesus, who draws from Isaiah many times in his 3-year ministry. As Scott Hahn and others have pointed out, the Davidic kingdom is the prototype for Jesus' proclamation of the kingdom of God. Isaiah 22 takes place in the Davidic kingdom. Here, we meet a man named Shebna, who holds an office in the kingdom called the Asher al-Habayit. This is a Hebrew word that's usually translated as over the house or prime minister. Shebna has been abusing his power, and so the Lord has sent the prophet Isaiah to tell him he's going to be replaced by Eliakim. In order to be replaced, we find out, Shebna has to die. This tells us that Shebna's office is lifelong and extends beyond his personal lifetime. That's our first clue about the office that Jesus is giving to Peter. The second clue is that Eliakim is a priest. This can be discerned because we're given an important detail. Eliakim is the son of Hilkiah. Hilkiah is a Levite name. In the Old Testament, the Levites were the tribe that all the priests came from. Additionally, the name Hilkiah was held by at least 2 high priests in the Old Testament. Also, Eliakim here is going to wear the robe and the girdle previously worn by Shebna. Robe is a translation of the Hebrew word katonet, and girdle is a translation of the Hebrew word abnet. Katonet and abnet were priestly garments described in Exodus 28:4. The last clue is that Eliakim is given the keys to the house of David. Keys were actually the badge of this office of being second in command to the king in the ancient world. The chief rabbi also possessed keys, but these were the keys to the temple. Symbolically, this meant that the chief rabbi possessed a teaching and interpreting authority over the Torah, the law of Moses. Jesus himself makes reference to this teaching authority in Matthew 23:1 when he mentions the teaching authority of the rabbis and says that they shut, kledos, literally in the Greek, his kingdom.
So the scribes and Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Therefore, do and keep what? Whatever they tell you. That's remarkable. Jesus commanding his disciples to keep the teachings of the Pharisees, whatever they say. Why? Because they sit on the cathedra of Moses.
There's another interesting reference to this key-holding ancient tradition in the Jewish writings called the Talmud. Brant Petrie tells the story.
When the first temple was about to be destroyed, bands upon bands of young priests with the what? The keys of the temple in their hands assembled and mounted the roof of the temple and exclaimed, "Master of the universe, as we did not have the merit to be faithful treasurers, these keys are handed back into thy keeping." They then threw the keys up toward heaven, and there emerged the figure of a hand and received the keys from them.
But Isaiah says the keys to the house of David, whereas Jesus talks about the keys to a kingdom. Well, in the ancient world, a kingdom was frequently referred to as the house of its foundational king. So the house of David and the kingdom of David are just two ways of saying the same thing. This interpretive conclusion is not Catholic alone. It's shared by more and more Protestant scholars as history continues to shed light on the ancient Hebrew tradition.
And this is their conclusion about Matthew chapter 16. Listen to these Protestant exegetes interpret the passage. They say this, quote, "The major opinion of modern exegetes is that Peter, as a sort of supreme rabbi or prime minister of the kingdom, is in 1619 giving teaching authority, given that his power, that is, the power to declare what is permitted, the rabbinic shara, loose, and what is not permitted, the rabbinic asar, to bind. Peter can decide by doctrinal decision what Christians must and must not do. This is the traditional Roman Catholic understanding, with the proviso that Peter had successors. This interpretation of binding and loosing in terms of teaching authority seems to us to be correct. Peter is the authoritative teacher without Peter." W.D. Davies, Dale C. Allison, Gospel according to St. Matthew 2, 638 to 639.
It's a spiritual matter. Ultimately, accepting the leadership of the Pope comes down to a reality that affects our life of prayer, our day-to-day behavior, the peace of our spirit with God. And when I was struggling with entering the Catholic Church back in 2000, I had cold feet because I did not fully understand the doctrines of Mary and the doctrine of the Papacy. And I went to the Lord in prayer, and it was a period of great, inner turmoil. While in prayer, the thought came to my mind, "John, why don't you do what your namesake did?" And I thought, what on earth does that mean? And I'm thinking, okay, my namesake. Well, that's the Apostle John. Okay, and so I start thinking of the Gospel of John, and I start pondering how the Gospel of John ends. And two of the last things that you see the Apostle John do in the Gospel of John, one is he receives Mary into his home at the foot of the cross. Okay? And then the very last thing that you see him do, he's actually walking along the Sea of Galilee following Jesus, right? But not just Jesus. There's somebody else he's following. Because Peter and Jesus are walking ahead. And Peter turns around and looks and sees John following and says, what about this man? And then there's, what if he remains, I come, you follow me, etc. So what is the last shot of the camera in the movie of the Gospel of John? The last camera shot is Peter and Jesus walking along the shore, and 5 steps behind is the Apostle John. And it came to me, that's what the Lord is trying to tell me. I'm holding out from joining the church because I won't take Mary into my home, and I won't follow Jesus and Peter. Okay? People of God, follow Jesus and Peter. It's a good journey.
I was wrong. Everybody needs someone to hold on. Take my hand. I've been a lonesome man. Took a while to understand. There's some things we can't live without. A man so prone to doubt. Faithful are the wounds of friends. So give it just a little time. Share some bread and wine. Weave your heart into mine, my friend.
When all these clues are connected, meaning the text is placed in its historical context, it's easy to see that Jesus, as the eternal Davidic king, is placing Peter as over the house or the prime minister of his kingdom. This position, as we have seen, is a lifelong office. It extends beyond the personal lifetime of the person. It's held by a priest. This priest alone has teaching authority over the Torah ben Adam, or the Torah, the law of all mankind. He sits on the cathedra, or the chair of the new Moses, Jesus Christ, and he is called a Papa, or a father, to the inhabitants of the New Jerusalem.
Farther along, I know all about it. Farther along, understand why. So cheer up, my brothers, live in the sunshine. We'll understand this all by and by. Tempted and tried, I wonder why the good man dies, bad man thrives, and Jesus cries 'cause he loves them both. We're all castaways in need of rope, hanging on by the last threads of our hope. In a house, a mirror full of smoke, confusing illusions I've seen. But where did I go wrong? Sang along to every chorus of the song that the devil